Welcome back to Outside Views. Today we're diving into one of the UK's most pressing issues, the small boats crisis, a heartbreaking situation that has seen countless migrants risking their lives to cross the Channel. The journey is treacherous and tragically it has claimed the lives of far too many, including children. In 2024 alone, at least 58 people have died attempting this crossing. But why has the UK seen this crisis escalate in recent years? What role has Brexit played in making the situation even more challenging to resolve? That's exactly what we are here to unpack today. Let's start by understanding the background of this crisis and how Brexit has fundamentally altered Britain's ability to respond. Prior to Brexit, the UK had access to an EU-wide migrant return policy. This policy wasn't perfect, but it worked reasonably well. Under the Dublin regulation, the UK could send asylum seekers back to the first safe EU country they arrived in. This system provided a measure of control over the movement of migrants and allowed for coordinated responses to migration issues across EU borders. But with Brexit, the UK left this arrangement and along with it, the tools it once had to manage cross-border migration effectively. Gone is the access to a common EU fingerprint database, which allowed the UK to identify migrants who had applied for asylum in other EU countries. Without these tools, tracking and processing migrants has become far more complex. And the result? More people smugglers or traffickers taking advantage of loopholes, more dangerous journeys, and a heightened strain on Britain's border security. Last week, Prime Minister Keir Starmer brought this issue to the forefront. At an Interpol conference in Glasgow, he pointed directly to Brexit as a major factor that has hampered the UK's ability to combat people smuggling. And Starmer didn't mince words. He called out the Brexit deal negotiated by Boris Johnson as insufficient, especially when it comes to security. According to Starmer, the UK could and should be doing better. He's seeking to establish a new security arrangement with the EU to regain access to critical intelligence sharing networks. This isn't about reopening the question of single market membership or customs union alignment. Starmer has been clear that he's not advocating for the return of freedom of movement either. But he does believe that closer collaboration with the EU is essential when it comes to tackling organized crime and human trafficking. So what is he proposing? Starmer aims to restore something close to the pre-Brexit security agreement, one that would enable the UK to play a leadership role in international investigations against people smuggling networks. This proposed deal would grant the UK real-time data access, allowing it to track people smugglers across EU borders, analyze their operations and disrupt their networks more effectively. For instance, with access to the EU's fingerprinting system, border force agents could quickly identify individuals who've already sought asylum elsewhere in Europe. And this would allow for faster asylum processing and potentially limit the flow of people attempting to enter the UK by sea. But securing this kind of agreement is not straightforward. It's going to require delicate negotiations with the EU, and it will likely come with strings attached. While Starmer is determined to avoid compromises on key issues like freedom of movement, the EU may not be so easily persuaded to offer unrestricted access to these databases without some concessions. The question remains, what price will the UK have to pay for this cooperation? The Prime Minister seems hopeful that a new pact with the EU could be built around mutual security interests. He argues that the migration crisis is a shared problem for both the UK and Europe, and that by working together, both sides stand to benefit. But let's be clear, Brexit has made this cooperation much harder to achieve. The UK's departure from the EU was framed as a chance to take back control. However, in practice, it has resulted in a loss of access to tools and resources that would have been invaluable in managing the small boat crisis. It's a stark example of how the realities of Brexit don't always match up with the promises that were made. For those who pushed Brexit as a means of securing Britain's borders, the irony here is hard to miss. Instead of enhancing border security, Brexit has in many ways made it more vulnerable. So how does the UK move forward from here? As I said, the current government seems committed to addressing the small boat crisis with a focus on cracking down on people smugglers. Starmer has announced a £150 million plan aimed at hiring 400 investigators and border officers. These new recruits will be armed with enhanced powers to combat trafficking, including counter-terrorism measures that allow preemptive action against smugglers. This approach would allow authorities to seize phones, track networks, and disrupt operations before boats even set off. But will this be enough to make a significant impact? Critics argue that without a broader partnership with the EU, the UK's efforts will be limited in scope. After all, human trafficking networks don't operate within a single country. They are transnational by nature. And without seamless cooperation with EU agencies, the UK's ability to dismantle these networks will be hampered. Another aspect worth considering is how Brexit has affected the lives of those attempting to cross the Channel. For many migrants, the UK represents a place of safety and opportunity. They come from war-torn countries, areas plagued by persecution, and regions with few economic prospects. The conditions they face are often unimaginable, and the small boats crisis is just one part of a much larger global migration challenge. And Brexit has meant that the UK is now further removed from broader European migration strategies. While the EU continues to work on regional solutions, the UK has effectively isolated itself from these efforts. It's a situation that not only affects border security, but also diminishes the UK's voice in shaping European responses to migration. In a speech at Interpol, Starmer emphasized the need for a leadership role for the UK. But to achieve that, the UK may need to reconsider its post-Brexit stance on EU cooperation. It's one thing to pursue sovereignty. It's another to tackle complex international crises on your own. And this brings us to a crucial point. Brexit was never going to be an isolated decision. Its effects ripple through every facet of UK policy, from trade to law enforcement to, migration. The small boats crisis isn't just about immigration. It's a window into the broader consequences of the UK's choice to step away from the EU. As Starmer pushes for a new agreement with the EU, the UK faces a stark choice: adapt and collaborate, or continue down a path of isolation. The tragedy of the small boat crisis highlights the human cost of political decisions. For every promise of sovereignty, there are real lives caught in the balance. And as we continue to see people risking everything to reach Britain's shores, we are reminded that migration isn't a problem that any one nation can solve alone. Brexit, for all its intentions, has complicated the UK's ability to manage this crisis. The question now is whether the UK is willing to do what's necessary to regain some of that lost ground. So thanks for watching Outside Views, and if you found this discussion insightful, please subscribe for more in-depth analysis on the major issues shaping our post-Brexit world. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged, and the next video is right here in the end screen.